Hey everyone. This week I'm doing an interview with Jesse Prince, a former Scientologist and Sea Org member who was involved with Scientology and the Sea Org from the late 1970s through the 1980s and actually worked at its very, very highest levels with David Miscavige and RTC, the Religious Technology Center, which is the highest, managing body of Scientology. It's not supposed to be a managing body, but that is what it has become under the leadership of David Miscavige. Jesse Prince was actually involved with RTC before David Miscavige took over RTC, and he was involved with legal aspects of that, with technical. He was highly trained as a Scientology technical person, and he of course went all the way up through OT7 as a Sea Org member. So he was around. It was actually in the building the day that David Miscavige walked in and basically executed a coup and took over all of Scientology by taking over the Religious Technology Center. Jesse Prince was actually there, and he writes in detail about all of these experiences in a new book he's published called Expert Witness, which I have done a video review on this channel, and now I've got Jesse on as a guest on the show. So I have a ton of questions that I wanted to ask him. We had a limited amount of time in which to talk today, so this interview is the first of what I hope will be many interviews with him. I don't have a new one scheduled yet, but I'm sure we'll work it out because he has insider information that literally no one else has or has spoken about in all of these years. And I was very curious to ask him about a lot of things that go on at the very, very top echelons of Scientology. There has been a lot of talk over the years about Mike Rinder, who was a former high-level Sea Org member, and then Marty Rathbun, who worked in RTC also directly under David Miscavige. The difference with Jesse Prince is that when he came out of Scientology, he did not have any desire to continue practicing it, nor did he want to take over or form his own group like Marty Rathbun did. And so he didn't start a blog, he didn't go out and do all the things Marty did. So, without further ado, here is Jesse Prince. Okay, so first off, Jesse, I would like to thank you for being on my channel and doing this interview. I really appreciate your time.
I certainly appreciate being invited, Chris, and something I've been looking forward to.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I have never written as many questions for somebody as I have when I was going through your book, Expert Witness, and I was just taking notes of things that you were talking about because there was so much in that book that was very enlightening. It really cast a light on dark areas that I had had questions about or had not known or not been clear about some things, but it also brought up so many things I wanted to, ask you more about. And my channel and my focus tends to go towards psychology, what goes on in people's heads, why people do what they do. And I wanted to ask you questions kind of focused around that and also focused around Scientology history and information that you have experienced that most others haven't. So I thought I might ask along those lines.
Well, that'll be wonderful.
Awesome. Because if people want to, know your history and know all of that, obviously they need to read your book. And we don't need to rehash all of that again.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, exactly. So my first question is, Hubbard ran Scientology after he was officially off of management because he was in hiding and couldn't be seen to be running the organization through all these advices, these issues he would write that didn't even have his name on it, but everybody kind of knew that it was from him, right?
Correct.
So a question I had, because I have accumulated a fairly large library of Scientology materials over the last few years, soft copy of tons of stuff he's written, but those advices are not really out on the internet very often. They're not, there's no collection of them anywhere. And I think one of the reasons for it is because you guys were having shredding parties all the time with these things.
Exactly.
So my question is, when this stuff was being shredded, was anybody thinking, well, we need to keep at least one copy somewhere really super secret because this is the old man's, directions to us? Or was it just get rid of all of it, trash all the evidence? Like, what was the thinking that was going on with that?
Well, there's a missing factor in the question that you're asking me, and that missing factor is another corporation that's not very well known or talked about in Scientology. The last time I checked, the corporation was called CST, Church of Spiritual Technology, and that that corporation exists solely to preserve the writings and words of L. Ron Hubbard. So, and it's separately incorporated. It has separate rights to the material, the copyrights, and all of this kind of stuff. And it's charged with the duty of preserving these things. So, whatever LRH said or did is being preserved by that organization, and it was throughout my time of being there. As a matter of fact, I went to that organization, CST, for the first time in 1986. And I'm not entirely clear exactly where it is, but it's on the way to Big Bear in California out there. It's up in the mountains, very secluded. And I've since heard that they have another place in a whole nother state somewhere, where they preserve the information. But to answer the question directly, there's always been a process whereby there was a copy of whatever he had to say.
Okay. So you think there's probably copies of all that stuff still with CST then?
Oh, absolutely. No question.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. Good to know. Because there were file cabinets of these things you had described, just tons and tons
of
these.
Shred, I mean, you couldn't even keep up with it, for one thing. It was coming in so fast, especially when I first got there, because, and when I say there, I mean the gold base. I came there specifically to help L. Ron correct international management at the time, and he was not happy with any aspect of it, in all honesty. And oh my God, and so a lot of back and forth, and he had a lot to say about the exec strata, the role of the executive director in Scientology. A lot to say about setting up these corporations so that he wouldn't be considered the managing agent of Scientology. A lot about movies, I mean, whatever subject came into his head, believe me, he could go on and on. There were people that transcribed, and it would literally just fill up a drawer in the file cabinet, just one. He's very prolific, talking as well as writing. And so, yeah, it was a lot of it all the time.
Interesting. Are there any things that you remember, with all of that, information, all of that stuff being sent down over the years? Is there anything that stands out to you still, or that you think of that was in those advices that you wish people knew about, or that it's been, you haven't seen elsewhere? Because you're familiar with all the tech and a lot of the policy as well. Like, what kind of good stuff was in those advices that we haven't seen anywhere else?
Well, if you're mining for good information, you may be asking the wrong person, because none of it is good to me. But I will say something that may be interesting in those advices would be the exchanges back and forth between L. Ron and myself while he was developing certain aspects of his technology. In particular, rollback, false data stripping, false purpose rundown. I was the pilot. I, amongst others, piloted a lot of those theories and ideologies, which later became bulletins and, techniques and procedures. But I was the person who did the experimenting with those procedures and sent the information back and forth to L. Ron, and that technology got developed. What's interesting about it is, we hear witch hunt today in America. Our president likes to use that term witch hunt. I don't think people fully understand what a witch hunt really is unless you've been in Scientology or you're actually a witch back in the day. Because, L. Ron had this thing going on when I first arrived at the Gold Base in 1982. He thought it was infiltrated by the FBI and CIA and other covert agencies, U.S. agencies, because they were coming after him so hard. For one thing, the Department of Justice was really coming after him. So there was this paranoia that just reigned, and that's where, this rollback. There's one advice in particular that may be interesting in alignment with what you're asking me about, is how he came up with the idea of doing the rollback procedure. And he used an example of Sirhan as being a dupe. And he talks about PDH. He went into this whole thing. He has to blame everything on psychiatry, but ultimately it's PDH. Person doesn't remember, but then something triggers them. There's a code word, there's a trigger, and then when they get triggered, they perform the act they were programmed to do. All this MK Ultra stuff, blah, blah, blah. He was really into that, and I don't know where he was reading that information from or what got him onto that, but there was all the rage when I got there. So we have to find the spy. So it's kind of like, okay, well, if his idea was, well, what are people saying? Okay, now let's go back. Where did they get that from? Using the auditing principle, earlier, similar, blah, 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 whatever. It was like, okay, well, where did you hear about it from? And who else did you hear from? So, I found myself doing this procedure on these certain lines that were going around the base, and, to find the spy, to find the dupe. We were either looking for a dupe or an agent or something like that. And of course, it never materialized. It was a good theory. That's why I say, what good is that shit? It was a good idea, or a seemingly good idea, but it never produced fruit. We never once ever found a government agent or anyone working for the government that even cared enough to even screw around with it. And it's just like, oh my God, make it stop. It was just senseless.
Well, exactly. And because you do have paranoia going on there. I mean, you have this guy whose mind is breaking down, and he's a very paranoid person. And so he develops these
worshipful followers, his worshipers, that just struck me as so odd when I first arrived there, of like, this guy is deified. Prior to that, I don't think I knew anyone in my life that I deified like that, any human. There's no person that I, ever thought, oh, I have to, really show respect. No. And this was a hot concept to me, but, in an environment like that, you have to learn how to survive or know how to survive. So.
Yeah, well, that's for sure. And you also kind of fast-tracked it in the Sea Org. I mean, you had an unusual career path in terms of how quickly you signed up. It got, ended up on the RPF, ended up at Gold. I mean, these things happen pretty quickly for you compared to how they usually go for other people.
It was happening so fast, I didn't even have time to leave. I didn't have time to think about leaving until it was all over.
Right. Exactly. Well, and I'm glad you brought that Sirhan thing up because I was going to ask you about that. So yeah, it is quite interesting. You also said in Toronto when we very first met ever, when we were in the same room together, I gave a talk on the Truth Rundown as I had experienced it and delivered it when I was on the RPF in the mid 2000s. And it was interesting to me that you said while I was giving my talk that this was not the same Truth Rundown that you had been familiar with or had piloted and worked with Hubbard directly on, I suppose, back in this time period. You talked about rollback just now and pursuing, these lines, these enemy lines Hubbard talks about, and I've talked about the rollback before. But what was rollback and what was Truth Rundown then?
Well, those things were really synonymous. It was called rollback prior to Truth Rundown. When it was still a pilot, it was called rollback. And then rollback became Truth Rundown.
Okay. Because they were definitely distinctly separate things by the time I got around to them. But like I said, that was not until the 2000s, so I can't speak to what happened in between there. Because you're also unique in that, you're a very high-level Sea Org member. I mean, you were at the very, 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 very top, getting up into Gold Base and then RTC, and then actually becoming personal friends with David Miscavige is how you described it in the book. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, we were friends for a long time, and it makes me feel so old when I hear people speak of David Miscavige with reverence and all of this, because when I was there, especially in the beginning part, he was like a younger brother to me, like a little brother that, he's doing good, but I can help him. I can teach him, which is kind of what our relationship was in the beginning, because when I first came there, I had to audit him. I audited him back to health. His health was failing. And, he had some stuff on his mind. So, I took care of him for almost a year after getting there as a priority. And then we just became friends. I mean, prior to that, I knew his brother, Ron Miscavige Jr. from Flag when I was there. And he and I used to go out. He taught me how to shoot guns and stuff. He was all into guns and weightlifting, on our whatever time we had off.
Was that Ron or was that David?
Ron.
Okay.
I knew Ron Jr. first, then I knew David, and I thought they were the same person. And then I met Ron Sr., so, and then I met Ron Sr.'s ex-wife, Loretta. So I've known that family for a very long time, probably decades, and
yes.
They've known me. So, and there was never this worshipful master crap going on with Miscavige. Now, when I was there, he was very much just a young, inexperienced person.
Interesting. And yet, when you first got there, he was just part of the crew. He wasn't the one in charge yet.
Well, what he was he was always the linchpin or the person that connected the corporations that they were trying to bring into existence. And what I mean specifically by that is Church of Scientology California, which used to have the same role as the Church of Scientology International used to have, but because of the Wallersheim lawsuit, the Department of Justice investigation, IRS, blah, 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 a new corporation had to be formed, and they quickly emptied out their assets, and they formed Church of Scientology International, transferred the assets from Church of Scientology California, CSC, to CSI. So all of that was done in an effort to get some corporate integrity going so that, by law and on paper, at least, Scientology could show that L. Ron was not the managing agent. and that it was each church entity that is incorporated is managed by the board members of that particular entity, which are listed on record, and it's all done, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, Miscavige has always been, from my experience, the linchpin or the connector between the different corporations. So we set up this Church of Scientology International. Another corporation that was set up was the Religious Technology Center, specifically created to own the marks that Scientology had. Author Services was created as a service organization for L. Ron to manage and monitor his royalties that he got from all of the books and tapes and stuff that Scientology uses, which are mandatory and blah, 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 blah. So it's like a built-in money machine for him, basically. And but for Author Services to be able to function amongst these nonprofit corporations as a for-profit corporation, all of the people that worked there had to retire from the Sea Org. Mm-hmm. And so that in and of itself created the illusion that, okay, this is not a church entity, it's a for-profit entity. Miscavige was supposed to be over that. But even corporately on paper, Miscavige was always on the board of trustees for the Religious Technology Center. He was always on the board of trustees for Church of Scientology International. There's different levels of executive and corporate responsibility with these corporations. You have, at the top, you have in the board of directors, you have the chairman, the secretary, and those people. And then above that, you have the trustees, at least in these Scientology corporations. Mm. So you have trustees, board of directors, corporation. And Miscavige was a trustee on all of the corporations.
Do you think he did that premeditatedly, like purposefully?
I think he did it on the advice of lawyers, because people like to, and I can see how this can happen. People like to attribute this great intelligence or this great cunning with Miscavige because he seemingly does stuff, blah, blah, blah. The truth of the matter is these Harvard, Yale law school attorneys are the ones running the show. And they're running the show specifically because Scientology is a cash cow for them. You wonder how, there was an article that recently Tony Ortega released about the judge that wrote an opinion about Scientology during the exact time period when I was there, and that was also a famous baseball player. But when you read the report from that judge, what we were doing had set government agencies like FBI and CIA on their heels. They were like, oh, let's just stop, and disengage with Scientology, give them what they want from what we were doing to them. And what we were doing to them were investigating the individuals in the organization on a personal level, creating freedom magazines, telling their business, exposing, doing everything we can. There was so much pressure brought to bear, and they were sued. So right. The government had to indemnify these people, on and on and on. At that point, they were coming after us. We had police and other people that would alert us if a raid was coming, but we were under raid watch so much. that'll frazzle anyone. I don't care how evil you are. It'll make you damn crazy. Being under raid watch, especially after going through one. I went through one. I know how that feels. But yeah, there was Miscavige has always been the linchpin for all of that. because he's on the board of trustees. And but technically he was over at ASI as
Right.
the board, and that's where that COB comes from. He was the COB of Office Services.
Right, and then he went over and became COBRTC.
Right.
But I mean, that's kind of what I've been wondering about is there's opportunism, there's taking advantage of a situation, and then there is premeditation. And I don't know how much. I mean, I don't really have any firm ideas one way or the other about it, as far as how Miscavige ended up being a fairly low-ranking messenger at the very beginning to taking the whole thing over within a 10-year time period. So I wonder how much of a mix of opportunism is there, of premeditation is there, of ruthless cunning, and this statement he made about how power is something you have to assume.
Right? I could see that, because the truth is, everything about L. Ron's death was haphazard. It was like a dumpster fire, unpredicted, unplanned, what the hell to do. So it was just like, and again, the counsel came from attorneys, Harvard trained, Yale trained. I mean, the people at the top of their field. They're advising and guiding Scientology so that it exists. Are
you referring to the type of people like Monique Yingling?
Yeah, and L. Ron's personal lawyers. Well, at the time, Heller, Linskin Heller. That was another law firm that was in the background, but around forever, and were involved in every aspect of Scientology litigation across corporate. There's certain ones that were entrenched. You had Earl Cooley, Sandy Rosen, those law firms, those powerful law firms, they start getting paid by Scientology, and Scientology pays them well, and it pays them immediately. There are no late payments and all that kind of crap. They pay them right away. And that having that opportunity of having a client like that, for some lawyers, for some law firms, make or break their career. We started off a lawyer in Religious Technology Center, that a new lawyer that hadn't really had any serious clients or established a business. He was just starting. We gave him like $110,000, retainer. So, and then you have these brilliant minds that are at the top of their field. So they get in there and they confuse the courts for years. People try to get Scientology, just can't get them. Why? Because number one, you have government employees that are, there's always a difference between a government employee and a private practice.
Right. Big time.
Private practice person is normally like a look by 10 times smarter. So this is how Scientology was able to rock the FBI and CIA on their heels as they're busy infiltrating and stealing information out of that. Our United States government feared Scientology, just to show you how paper thin we are. For our government, the United States government, to be worried about these pricks, they got the whole national security, but we're on them so bad that we're threatening everyone that's, running the place. And they did not shut that down for being some kind of treasonous, crazy organization. Because these damn lawyers, they're so smart, they keep it going in court. They argue this little point, and then the Constitution, and and it can go on for lifetimes.
Now, are you saying, because I want to be super clear about this, are you saying that the lawyers are the ones who came up with those strategies, or were they? Because L. Ron Hubbard came up with this concept of fair game, and his vindictive nature, right? So the idea that and this is what I wrote in my book based on the information I had to hand, right, was we have Hubbard's vindictive policies. We have Miscavige directing, what to do with the IRS over the 80s and into the 90s to deal with them. And they were absolutely, as you described, fair gaming the IRS,
like crazy.
And
yeah.
And the lawyers were, so are you saying the lawyers were the ones who came up with that strategy, or are they the ones who brilliantly
teaching them? The lawyers were the ones that taught them how to be effective.
Okay.
What do you want to do? You want to, here's our policy. Our policy is to go after people as hard as we can.
Right.
Within the letter of the law. What can we do? Well, we can dig up all of their public records. Then we can hire private investigators. And then we can go a little bit deeper, get the phone records. Next thing you know, we're finding out they're having affairs or whatever the hell they're doing. They're not supposed to. Somebody's always doing something that's a little, whatever. And if you're able to find just anything and start exposing it, you're going to back these damn people off. It works. It's, as a strategy, it works. So the lawyers would help execute that strategy within the bounds of the law. And they were able to operate in the back by having, these ex-cops, ex-FBI, ex-CIA people that are still connected to people that are still employed in these agencies. They're able to get certain information for money. So what the lawyers function in the intelligence aspect of the Scientology apparatus is they're the ones that clean the money. The Scientology pays the lawyers. The lawyer pays some PI firm. The PI firm pays any cop on the take or anybody else. It's like you can start seeing the arm's distance, but it's really being directed by the same person because this is a procedure. This is how they do business. So that's how the lawyers do it. The lawyer's role is getting the money to the people executing the programs. If you're trying to haunt someone, you're trying to scare them to death or make them crazy, that costs money. The lawyers are the ones responsible for making sure the money flows to get that happen, to get that activity happen without exposing where the money comes from. That's another, you
can maintain these layers.
Says, well, we just paid for PI services. We don't know what it is. But in the meantime, they're the ones directing exactly what the PIs are supposed to do.
Right. And because it seems, something that's not really particularly mentioned ever, and I hadn't really thought about it till we started talking here today, is if Miscavige had brilliantly laid all of this out in some kind of 3D chess, in 1985 or something, then when Hubbard died, he would have been all ready. He would have had the will set up. He would have had this set up, that set up. But that's not what happened. That's not how it went down.
Not at all.
It was a lot crazier.
First, you got to understand, Miscavige, I don't think he even has more than a 7th grade education for one damn thing. That doesn't mean he's not smart, or he doesn't have some intelligence, but, because he's studied under, as I said, these Harvard-trained lawyers, with the Yale, blah, blah, blah. Even I certainly learned, I know Marty and anyone else that has been around these people, they're so damn smart, they trick, especially these defense lawyers. Oh my God, you kill somebody, they get you off. You know what I mean? You got to be smart to do that. So when you're in that class of people, you pick things up, you learn things, and that's the education that the Miscavige has had, and he's probably proficient at this point because he's had a long time to learn, and he's had all the money needed so he could afford any learning curve that it took to prepare him to assume that religion. But what's funny to me is now he's running around, kind of like a young Kim Jong-un, he's got this entourage, and it's like TV, like, how did this just get so backwards? How did this get so crazy like this, where it's just this one guy, and then I think, that's probably what eventually drove Hubbard mad too, because he was he was mad as a hatter at the end of his days, and I can see, you got that delusion and ego going on. I don't
Oh,
wish
yeah.
ill on anyone, but I can see that happening to Miscavige.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, okay, so you actually audited and security checked Miscavige.
Right.
So
I was his auditor for about a year and a half.
all right. So, I mean, you've been in his folder. What that means is that you had a more intimate knowledge of David Miscavige and his personality and who he actually was in the most, open format, an auditing session as you can possibly get. I mean, that's at least in the world of Scientology, that's where people are going to open up more than anywhere else, right?
Right.
Did you ever see or feel he was expressing true remorse over actions he did that were wrong? The compassion, empathy, I mean, any of that?
Well, it's hard to answer that question. And the reason it's hard to answer that question is because when I was dealing with him, I was under a certain delusion myself, delusion of not knowing the truth, delusion of just being involved in something that was kind of senseless. So within the bounds of what we were doing, I didn't see Miscavige doing anything. Well, I don't know. That question is so hard for me to answer. And I'll just say this, one of the reasons why it's so hard to answer, because once I got to that gold base, whatever Scientology they were doing there was way different than anything I'd ever done up and until that point. I'm from sitting and reading bulletins and doing courses and stuff like that. You get this, at least I had got a certain personification of what Elron was, how he was, and and the whole movement itself. But then to get to that level and really to see these people don't practice Scientology. What are they doing here? And that was the first thing I had to figure out is what is actually going on here? And why am I here? They wanted someone here that, knew Scientology well. Yet I get here and they don't know it. What the hell?
I think I probably would have had a very similar reaction. I mean, I was pretty tech trained. I was into the tech. I was very much into knowing the knowledge of Scientology. So I can relate in many ways. I mean, we mentioned we were both course supervisors and auditors, and we really liked knowing this stuff. I wanted to ask, again, so many questions. So let me start with this. You got into Scientology for the supernatural powers and abilities. Did I, right?
But yeah, pretty much, yeah.
And by the time you got to the gold base, had you yet done the OT levels?
I had done every OT level. I was in the middle of, well, I guess I'd done old OT6 and then new OT6 and then old OT7 and then new OT7. I think I started new OT7 when I got to the gold base. I started and finished that while I was there.
Okay. And that
but yes, I had done all. I mean, I've been doing Scientology OT levels since the 70s. With my first foray into doing the OT levels was in 1979, and they were not anywhere near the same, with the exception of crazy OT3. They were not the same OT levels that are being done today.
Right. They had changed them up over the years.
Changed them up completely. So, all of the OT levels that existed at the time up until 1979, I had completed all of those levels. And, I went to Flag and redid all of my training, verified all my auditing, and,
right.
The rest.
Well, did you feel by that point after having done these levels, getting up to the gold base, or maybe right before then or something. You're auditing on 7, I guess. Any superpowers? I mean, there's a Scientology mindset, and then there's the hindsight, where we go, we were idiots. How could we have, what were we thinking? I don't really know. It was all kind of crazy. But at the time, what were you thinking in terms of those superpowers? That did OT3 do anything for you? Did 7 do anything for you? Did you think it was gonna be coming on the upper levels? What were you thinking?
Well, I talk about that in the book, so yeah. I don't want to really give that away.
Okay.
But what I will say about doing those levels is I already had something going on in my mind prior to any association with Scientology concerning the human condition, what we are. At 10 years old, my mom died rather suddenly. And at the time I was going to Catholic school. And that just was like shocking. And then anyway, I started having these out of body things happen to me, maybe about a year after she passed, where I would just be outside of myself or find myself outside of myself, and it scared me so bad. I thought, at first I thought I was losing my damn mind. Talked to my dad, oh, you got to go see a psychiatrist. And I'm like, oh, fuck that, Then I had seen too many TV, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, all that kind of shit. So no, I didn't want that. And so it was kind of like something I didn't really talk about until I got into a conversation with my younger brother, who's 2 years younger than me. And he said the same damn thing was happening to him. So we would talk to each other, kind of secretly about it, like, what the hell is this? And then we kind of started telling each other different things to do the next time it happens, because, kind of getting outside of yourself, the immediate thing that happens is the fear, the panic, the anxiety, like, oh my God, all these emotions, and, you can hear yourself breathing and all of this going on when you're not supposed to be able to, because we're so programmed, we're so trained to be in the matrix that, we're not trained to understand ourselves or know that we're multidimensional beings. But yeah, so this was happening to me, and then when I got in it, I had somewhat gotten it under control, really. I at least the fear part. I had gotten the fear part where and I couldn't just willfully, go out and get it. This would just happen spontaneously on its own, and I just learned to not fear it and learn to try to explore a little bit, when it happened. Like, one time, I was laying in the bed and I was seeing myself in the bed, and I decided to pass back and forth through the window, to get myself used to seeing how it feels to go through seemingly solid objects, But it was a window I could still see on the other side. But as far as doing that on the wall, I mean, there's a lot of mental to overcome. And these, Buddhist people that study this stuff and know more about this phenomenon can explain it much better than I can. But it is something that can happen, and it is something that has happened to people. And it happens every time at death. But, so I was curious about that. And when I went into Scientology, it's the first place that seemed to take a disciplined approach to understanding this phenomenon of learning more fully what the human condition is, what it means to be human, what the hell are we,
Right. Yes, for sure. And definitely, it certainly makes a lot of promises around that. And it definitely...
Yeah, it does. And as I said, I was already struggling with that because I already had this side thing going on and that I really couldn't talk about because it made me appear insane. And, but I was curious about it, and I just got out in the world and I started reading about it. I started reading other books. I read a lot of books that it was possible, and people that were doing it at the time in the 70s. I read a shitload of books, and so I knew it was something out there to learn about that. I just didn't know.
And so then in doing Scientology and finding this wealth of information on spirit and life and the mind and the relationship between these things, according to L. Ron Hubbard, and it is a coherent whole. I mean, there's all kinds of holes in it, but there is a logical wholeness to it. It does sort of make sense from certain points of view, as long as you don't question certain things too much.
Right. And that's the scary part about Scientology. But, you know, one thing that I saw immediately in Scientology as I started studying, that it seemed to be a combination of ideas that I had already read about, or ideas that were already under discussion, or a topic in popular culture or whatever. It wasn't anything wholly unfamiliar to me. And that's what made it seem so familiar and so right at the time, because, you know, people are asking these questions. I mean, you know, in the 70s, I've been taking the LSD, all that kind of crap. Any person that is, you know, Timothy Leary and other people that have did the LSD know about the out-of-body phenomena, because that happens to people, you know, and people lose their mind because, you know, we're so trained to only accept this reality, you know, and it's
right.
And again, death is itself is horrifying. I mean, every time it happens, and I kind of get into that aspect of it at the end of the book. I finally got taken to a place that I had been searching for all my life when I nearly lost my life. So, the search goes on. I think life is really about, what you have in your mind, what you're trying to work out. And we work it out as best we can.
Absolutely. Well, that helps in terms of speaking to, where your head was at, where your mindset was at when you were in there. And then, what I was trying to, I guess what I'm trying to it's not like a predestined place I'm trying to get to here with these questions. I'm just trying to get to where, what was Scientology doing for you during that time period, I guess, is really kind of what I'm wondering with the tech and the auditing that you had. You got to the highest levels where, the most dedicated, most loyal, most on source, on purpose Scientologists worked and played and did and led, led Scientology.
Let's back that up just a little bit, because the truth is, I got into Scientology in San Francisco, came to LA to do my EPF. After 3 months, got put on a mission of all things, and a very important one, to establish this, doing a bunch of shit I knew nothing about. And, and then being forced to stay there. It wasn't like, when I first went there, I was like, yeah, okay, I want to learn this, man, blah, 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 blah. Now I'm locked in the damn room. They won't let me out. I mean, I was literally locked away for damn near a month, couldn't even go outside the fucking room. And, because all of these people are preventing me from doing that. And then out of survival, I decided, okay, I'm going to learn what these people are so convinced that will make me better. I'm going to learn, because that's all they keep saying. If you just do the tech, everything will be okay. If you just learn it, you'll thank yourself. And it made me feel guilty. It's like you sign your contract, you're violating your contract. You said you wanted this, and now, you're a loser, you're not doing it, blah, 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 so it just, I said, okay, I'm going to try it. And, I guess I've just always been the type of person, if I'm going to do something, I'm going to do my best at it. I'm going to learn it. I'm going to challenge it. I'm going to challenge myself and see what happens. I've always been that way, just as a person. So that was my approach to the study. And in the early parts of the study, I enjoyed the communication, or the explaining of how communication works, and how, people talking to one another, and then taking that a step further, the exchange of energy, and then how people communicate non-verbally, and all of these things were going through my head. So it was like, yeah, okay, this is worth learning. Every time I'd find a little something, that would be worth learning. It's like, oh, this grade 0 stuff about communication and other people's ideas. That I don't know how else I would have known that unless I'd studied psychology or psychiatry, or studied something about human behavior. On level 1 with problems, learning, about problems, and how that, builds up and can stop you or confuse you. Well, that was real to me, because that happens in life. When you have a problem, you don't know what to do. You sit there, scratch your damn head. So, these concepts about problem solving, the source of problems, the inaccuracy of perception itself that could create a problem, blah, 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 these things, studying these things. And again, stuff that I studied already in Buddhism, or concepts that I read other places, so it wasn't wholly unfamiliar to me. The concept of confession. I was raised a Catholic. We did it every Friday. I was an altar boy, so that, and how it makes one feel to have a clean heart, I understood that because I had done it already. So, that, and so all of that was very interesting to me. And it was like, this is like basic information that's good to know for people that are interested in that type of thing. And I just always been a nerdy kind of person where, well, why is this and why is that, so it was right up my damn alley. So
yeah.
It's that. And then when I got to those OT levels, I mean, the very first one was basically, well, after the clear thing, and I see that I should have got the clue right then and there. Because after going through that clear, all of that dynamic auditing, just nonstop making myself insane, erasing everything I ever knew, everyone and everything. And then at the end, all of this quote unquote whole track shit coming up. And then what does the person say? You know what? I'm making this shit up. It's not real. I'm just making it up. Oh my God, you're done. Are you fucking kidding me? And then OT8, now the new EP of OT8, the whole thing. You were just making it all up in the first place. Hey, well, can I have my $1 million back and go fuck yourself? And I won't make it up no more.
I know, right? It's actually kind of infuriating in a way, for me, to look at the clear cog and then look at OT8 and then exactly what you just said. The sum total of all of Scientology is, hey, pal, guess what? You were just making it all up.
Making it up. And you're encouraged to make it up in the beginning, with running imaginary incidents. I mean, people that are trained and stuff, we know that, you're told you got to make this shit up. And then, you make it up, and next thing you know, it starts becoming real, oh, please make it stop. Make it stop.
That's right. Totally. All right. Well, I guess I was just trying to kind of establish whether, when you get to gold, when you at that point in time and you're up there at the gold base and things are getting real and like shit's getting pretty real at times. Were you feeling that the tech was helping you, that you were achieving your goals personally, or were you kind of starting to go, wait a minute, this old guy is a little bit nuts. These advices don't make a lot of sense. This environment is crazy. These people aren't even doing Scientology. I mean, there's so many, things flying around.
Let me just say this. When I got there, there was no me anymore. There was just it. There was no me. There was like, look at this fucking mess. and these are the people that are supposed to sort it out for him. So, there's no, oh, I'm winning on my courses. None of that shit. No, all of that was gone. There's no personal individual anymore. It was just like, you're part of the Borg, and this is how we roll, and that's it.
Okay.
Run over by a tire. Guess what? We're not even going to sweep your ass up. We're just going to keep going.
Right. All right. Well, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So when did you first start seeing physical violence from Miscavige or others? And what was your thought? What was your thinking about that? You mentioned in your book grabbing this guy, John, and shaking him up and, you know, and being even involved in that to some degree. I mean, did you ever get involved in that?
John Eagle, yeah. Oh, he totally broke that spell. He was great. But let me just go back to the first question about the physical violence.
Yeah.
You know, so contrary to how I trained and studied prior to going up to that gold base, Sea Org members or people that had committed themselves to that cause were given respect. L. Ron said, you know, they're even lionized because these are unselfish people that are actually doing something to try to make a difference for humanity. None of that going on at the gold base. When I got up there, L. Ron treated people so horribly. You know, they were all plants, all FBI people that had given their entire life to the subject were now made to jump in the lake, you know, spit tobacco in their face, all this kind of shit. And that kind of started immediately once I got to gold base. I tell you, it was just like a shock. The cognitive dissonance that greeted me once daylight. You know, when I got there, I came in there under the cover of night. So, you know, not a lot of shit going on. But once the sun came out and I could see it, it was like, oh my God, what the hell? And, you know, and all I could think of is like, Dennis Ehrlich told me I didn't have to go here because he had told me, he was my senior at Flag, and he said, you don't have to go there. I wouldn't go. That's what he said to me. I don't want to go work with that one. Hell no. You know, and he's like, you shouldn't do it, man. You're not going to like it. I can tell you that right now. You know, and I'm like, I don't know what else to do, you know, and I'm going to get declared if I don't do it, you know, and all this pressure. So, you know, I ended up going anyway, but no, that's why there is no self. You know, there is no self. There's just, you become the board. You find your little place in that cog and you get to rolling, because it was the L. Ron show all the time. He came out and whatever, it was like all eyes on him, whatever he wants, we're saving the world. So it's just like the queen bee and the little drones just following. There's no individual, you know, self in any of that shit.
Right.
In that Borg mindset.
Okay. Okay, let's talk about Miscavige a little bit more. I still have a couple more questions about him as a person.
Okay.
Did you ever hear him? I mean, I asked about, you know, in his auditing sessions and stuff, you know, expressing remorse and that.
Anyway, let me. It just came to me. L. Ron is the one that encouraged Miscavige to start beating people. Yes. And this came through advices, because, you know, some withholds or something. You know, the person goes in the session. It gets reported up to L. Ron, and then he just goes into a fucking rage. He did what? What? If I was there, I'd spit tobacco right in his face. I just get a big thing, and so there Miscavige go. We got to comply with whatever L. Ron wants. So he goes and chews tobacco. He doesn't even chew tobacco. He's like, this shit is gross, but I got to do it. So, you know, he goes and then he spits all over this fucking guy. You know, and it's just like, oh man, this is like, are you serious? You know, with David Mayo, this is a guy that you know, I trained with. He was like a mentor to me. And now I get there, his damn teeth are falling out. You know, he's being made to run around a damn pole. That was another crazy, you know, L. Ron idea, running program, having people run till they injure themselves. And out in the desert in the hot sun, it was just like, I've reached crazy town. And
right.
They had a separate property down from the gold base It was called Happy Valley, and it was where they were going to put the children. But they ended up putting all the former executives there, you know, EB International, Phone Messages, blah, blah, blah. And they ended up calling that place Happy Valley, the Institute for the Criminally Insane. And they would be out there literally torturing people. I mean, you know, what is that? That program that came out about the guy doing a study with the students where some were jailers and some were prisoners.
Oh, the Stanford Prison Experiment.
Yeah, that's what that shit was. On steroids. On steroids. It's kind of like, that's what happens. You know, humans, I mean, and, you know, people don't got a whole lot of damn sense. And they get scared and they do real stupid things. And anything can happen. And to me, that's just that Stanford experiment on steroids and never stopped.
Yep. I lived it myself in the Sea Org, and especially on the RPF. I totally know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's bad, and it has to do with authority and all kinds of crap.
But I mean, even not in an RPF setting, just in the Sea Org setting, how you have to bow down and kowtow to, you know, a grown-ass man has to sit and listen to a 12-year-old tell him how fucking unethical he is. I mean, you know, oh my God, that place is scream again. Make it stop.
Yeah, it really is that crazy. And I lived through it too. I had 14-year-old girls telling me all about, you know, what an out ethics cretin I was, and I was just like, who are you again? What is this? How is this happening?
And why aren't you
right
in
now?
School?
Yeah, it was crazy times. Did you ever see outside of session? Let me put it this way: did David Miscavige ever apologize for anything? Did you ever see him do that?
He apologized to me.
He did.
Yeah. One time he got upset. Well, a couple of times it happened. He called me a nigger a couple of times. And the first time he did it, I didn't quite know what to do. And then he did it again, and people started looking at me. So then I took him to the side, and I said, Dave, you know what? You're calling me nigger and shit, and it ain't working, and it's upsetting me. As a matter of fact, you know, if you keep doing that, it's just going to be me and you. I'm going to beat your motherfucking ass if you do it again, period. And he just said, you know, you're right. I'm sorry for that. I'm not going to do it again. We can't do that shit around here. And he never did it again.
No shit. You actually told him that.
Of course. You know, all of this deification of Miscavige, I mean, this is mind-boggling to me. Like I said, he was like a little brother to me, you know, and Elron brought me there to help fix Miscavige and everybody else that was at that base. So none of these people were on a pedestal to me.
Right.
For any reason.
And that is definitely very different from how it is developed, what it's developed into now. I mean, you can't go into Miscavige's sphere and question him or in any way challenge his authority. And you were there.
I go and get that bastard by the ear. Come on, session time, buddy. Let's go.
Right. Yeah, you had the ability to do things people can't really get away with.
And he was my friend too. You know, I don't want to. You know, when you're friends with someone, I don't know, it's just a different relationship. I mean, I was just did an interview with Miscavige's father, Ron Miscavige, you know, where, you know, how crazy the relationship becomes, where he has to call his young kid sir and all this kind of shit, you know. And, but prior to that, you know, that was his son. He raised him. There was a relationship there before, and for that reason, you know, just I could never go there with the strangle your little ass. That's what'll happen. No.
Right.
I mean, I'm the guy that pulled the gun on him, you know.
Well, that's exactly where I'm going next, because you are the only person I know who has ever done that. And there's not, you know, I'm pretty sure if we were selling tickets, there'd be a line of people who'd be very, very willing and anxious to get into that position of doing something like that, of basically having power over their abuser. and you were in a position where there was a kind of a coup happening. You know, he marches into the RTC offices. He's got his beginnings of this entourage he's building. He's clearly taking control. And you described it great in the book, and I'm not going to try to rehash that now, but I am curious, what was that like? I mean, to stand there and be in that position, in that situation.
Well, the only reason that happened is because they tried to compromise me. You know, prior to that, you know, and I had already knew it was over. I knew there was no OT levels. I knew that this OT8 was a disaster. I knew the death was a disaster. Elron was a dumpster fire, and we're running around lying to everyone. You know, and as I said, Dave and I were friends. We did trust one another. But there was nothing left for me in Scientology. Nothing. No reason for me to be there at all. At all. The only reason I was there was, like you say, for the magic. I was there to learn my original thing. And it just wasn't there. And that man died horribly. And, you know, my Scientology experience actually shifted from, you know, learning magic or learning the secrets of being human into a more normal education, which is how to survive in a corporate world, how to run a business, you know, how to hire lawyers, what the hell trademarks. I mean, I learned a lot of secular things that I would have learned in the world in my later years in Scientology, which ended proving to be, you know, more valuable to me than that shit I was in there doing. And so it wasn't even a focus anymore of just like, oh, following Airline. It's like, no, I'm mature there. You know, I was in my 30s, you know, and all of that. And that's when people mature. So I had a mature perspective. I was managing a multi-international organization. I had many people that reported to me. I had intelligence network and, you know, all kind of shit, public relations, whatever, you know, and I learned those things. So that to me was worth it. And the experience of working with some of those lawyers was pretty exceptional to me. In particular, Earl Cooley, because he and I were actually friends. I really enjoy working with Earl Cooley. I really enjoy working with Joe Yanni, John Peterson, Chris Cobb, Larry Heller. You know, these people taught us, gave us an education that we didn't get because we didn't go to school. But, you know how you got to clear words and you got to study all of this law, you know, so just to understand what they're trying to say to us. So that was a whole different learning thing, you know, learning to set up corporations, learning to do notes, treasurer, finance, setting up offshore corporations, you know, setting up the Swiss bank account. I mean, I learned all kinds of shit in there that has nothing to do with those policies and stuff that they're selling to people.
Right. It must have really been something. You know, guys that get up to that level get busted sometimes, and some of them are even still in the church or still around. And I'm curious about your opinion on this. You know, you went all the way to the top. You saw behind the curtain. You saw the little man with the levers. You saw all of it.
Right.
Other people get to that level. Even if they're not in RTC, they get to the gold base. They're around. There's rumors. There's people. I mean, you know, people talk. You know, just because they're Scientologists doesn't mean they're not people first. You know, do the same damn things people do.
Right.
What do you think after somebody has seen behind the curtain and then gets busted? You know, in 2000, there was a whole slew of people who got sent down to PAC. I think it was like 30 or 40 people. They come down. I was on the RPF with some of those people. They never breathed a word about any of this stuff, right? Never would. They stay in, they stay loyal. Why do you think they do that after they've seen what they've seen?
Because I think you're thinking they've seen a little more than they have. They have incomplete information. The right hand rarely ever knows what the left hand is doing in Scientology. And information is segregated, bifurcated, on a need-to-know basis, all this kind of shit. Very few people have the complete picture of what's going on. Right. I guarantee you, anyone that came down from a pack, after working up there, has no clue what really happened to L1. I bet they all think, oh, he causatively left the body. They're still buying that short story, when nothing could be further from the truth. So, and that's how people are held. The lie is binding. If people actually knew, they would probably have a similar reaction to me of like, oh my God, I wasted my whole life on this shit, and this, this guy wants to be the devil, and in the meantime, I've given everything, and I don't even have a retirement. I don't have education. I don't have work history. I have nothing, and this to me is why a lot of people don't leave, because they have nothing to go to. Scientology demands that you destroy everything that you ever had prior to coming into Scientology that possibly disagrees with it. People disconnect from their parents. They disconnect from their brothers and sisters. They offer up their children into Scientology, who then become brainwashed and disconnect from them. The horrors that happen by being associated with this don't seem to end. So, I don't know how it is, but and to me, I am a person that have faith in a higher power. Somehow, I never proselytized to my brothers and sisters, or my father, or any of my relatives. I never told them, oh, I'm in this great movement, and it's helping me so much, and blah blah blah, and all this. Never had any relative anywhere near Scientology. I mean, my brother would come, who's a musician, and I'd walk him through income and all the secret places. Like, yeah, look what I'm doing, but do you want auditing? Do you need set? None of that shit. Never proselytized to my family. And so for that reason, I was able to come back to him and get accepted, because there was no disconnection. They didn't have that poison Scientology shit in their mind. So thank God for that. I limited my insanity to me.
Right.
And that was it.
Yeah, it's true, actually. Some of those people also, I'm thinking right now, they are second-gen members, or their families are all in, or they have no family to go to. So they just sort of feel stuck, Yeah,
they walk out the door and be homeless and hungry. I mean, who the hell wants that?
Yeah, exactly. I had similar thoughts myself before I finally took the plunge.
Me too. I was ready to die, just be dead,
Yep.
We'll try it again. Hit the reset button,
Yeah, exactly. Maybe, okay, totally, because we're going to have to wrap up here shortly. So I just wanted to get a couple other things in that I've been curious about that you are in a unique position to answer.
Okay.
I have said for quite a while that I don't think Hubbard knew about the formation of the International Association of Scientologists. That was in '84. So he was still alive. Miscavige created it. You wrote that it was formed specifically to divert funds to offshore accounts in case there was a raid or an intervention by the DOJ or the FBI or something.
Right.
Hubbard was not big on membership things and straight donations. He was big on selling books and services, according to everything I've ever read or heard him say. Do you know if he knew about the IAS?
No, and it's actually contrary to some policy about money for memberships and blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
And that being said, I was one of the original persons that was also involved in setting up that international association. We discussed it, and we knew that it was contrary to the policy. But what we were facing is this. If the Department of Justice comes in here today, the IRS comes in here today, if they seize all the assets, if they seize our bank accounts, that's the end of Scientology. And it would be our fault if that happens. The lawyers pardon me, advised us, well, what are you going to do? Are you prepared for this to happen? Because it looked like it was imminent anyway. And if you're not prepared, we got to start getting money offshore. We got to start getting money out of these American bank accounts or accounts that can be subpoenaed or wherever. We have to put the money in different places. And that's when money started being diverted to Cyprus and Switzerland and different things like that. So the idea was, preservation of the system itself. And that's why it was started. And I don't think it doesn't matter how Elrond felt about it. He was incapable of being rational, period. If people were worshiping him, there was a problem. So, in the meantime, we're trying to run a damn business. So it was a business decision, really. And it's a business decision that made sense.
Well, absolutely. And it's Scientology's primary income source now, as far as I can tell. So it was the thing that actually did ensure the future of Scientology, which they're always saying it does. So They're saying the right thing but it's kind of for all the wrong reasons,
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah,
all right.
And getting that ship was also part of that. We may have to go back to sea. Because of the pressure, we were preparing to be banned in the United States, in all honesty. We were literally preparing for that eventuality.
That totally makes sense. And then separate question. You also wrote a couple times in the book about, the whole point of you being an expert witness for Scientology, or one of the things that was going on when you were still in then, was you had to be shielded from knowing certain things. Vicky Asnaran and others were purposefully keeping you in the dark, and even knowingly that was happening. And I'm curious whether you ever found out after the fact what were some of the things they were keeping from you.
No, everything happened so fast, but I want to be clear how that came up of shielding me.
Yeah.
Straight off of advice from Earl Cooley. When we were contemplating doing the RICO action against the advanced ability centers that were being created at the time. And, I would regularly be put in mock courtroom situations where I'm on the stand and these lawyers are asking me these questions, and they say, now you see, I answered a question wrong, and I see you messed up there because that opens the door to this, and you don't have to say that. You're giving too much information. So, by going through this with these lawyers, I learned what to say, what not to say, how to say, what I am compelled to say, what I'm not compelled to say. You basically learn to shut the fuck up. Don't give information. So, that was. I'm sorry. What was your question? I sometimes I just go back and I stay back.
No problem. I appreciate you giving that clarification. I was just curious whether you ever found out afterwards what they were in the dark about.
Yeah. Anyway, so I didn't. Some things I did not want to know. Because look what happened. And this is a prime example. Look what happened to Stacey Brooks. She found out some shit. She found out about bank accounts that Bob Minton had, blah, blah, blah. They got her ass in deposition, start pounding her, and then the wrong thing popped out of her mouth. Ooh. She told where Bob's bank account was, and the next thing you know, he is completely taken out. Scientology is wrapping up all its problems, and it's just neat and tidy. So, that that can happen. That's why it's all very important.
Right, that makes sense.
I didn't know. I didn't want to know things. I myself didn't want to know shit where I'd have to be, sit in court and lie and then get caught in a lie, because then you can go to jail for that too. And the whole thing with being an expert witness was to be a qualified witness, and not a Scientology, worshiper If they just wanted a worshiper, they could have got Moxon's stupid ass up there, who legally is more qualified than me because he's a lawyer, you know, or any of the other people. But they had to have someone with a clean record. You know, I've never had any kind of federal shit going on. I've never been jailed for anything. As a matter of fact, I even got a government security clearance to work in a sensitive area of the post office after leaving Scientology. So whatever shit they spread about me being awful and criminal is just, you know, propaganda. But yeah, so you know, there's certain things I just couldn't know, didn't want to know. And when I go into the courtroom, it was from the heart, you know, and it you know, I told it, and you know, it worked. It's worked every damn time. It's worked for them and against them, you know.
Right. All right. Last question for you, and I'll try to make this brief, but I mean, it could be a big, huge thing, but we'll try to just focus on this quickly. At the upper levels, right? You were in RTC for years. You're at international base for years. You're working with the big wigs of Scientology. You're running Scientology. What was the attitude then, when you were in? Because obviously it's, you know, what it is now, towards the lower echelon Sea Org members and service org staff members, because you guys had money, you had good clothes, you had good food, you go to Germany, you drive on the Autobahn. I mean, you had some nice experiences as well, which you wrote about in your book. And I was never at that level, and I never had experiences like that when I was in the Sea Org. It was just work. So I'm wondering, how were the lower levels considered or thought about at that level?
Very interesting question, Chris. And I'll just start out by saying this: the lower levels, going all the way down to mission network, was not well thought of. As a matter of fact, you see what happened to those mission holders. The very people that were feeding people up, you know, into the Scientology money machine that could have gotten people having money extracted from them forever, they immediately cut that off. You know, just show you how mismanaged. I mean, and this was L. Ron's idea. You know what? Right. That was Miscavige's idea. It wasn't. You know, and so, you know, and then that's why no one missed him when he died. It's like, we knew the people that were actually managing Scientology. Sometimes we do stupid shit, you know, we do senseless stuff, and we do it because we have to. We already know it don't make sense, but if you non-comply to L-Ron, you might as well just stick your face under a railroad track or something, you know what I mean? Because you're done. You're done. His power is absolute. His rule is absolute. So you get used to doing illogical things, you know, and you had to be so skillful at doing illogical things that it couldn't be obvious that it was a bad idea in the first damn place. I mean, this is a kind of working condition, you know, working under that. So, you know, that's kind of the way it was.
Interesting. Okay. So even if you had wanted to treat the lower levels better, get them, you know, I don't know, some study time, some bridge.
They had to get L-Ron out the way first for any logical management to happen. You know what I mean? And that's what I meant when I'm like, God damn, we got to babysit L-Ron. We got to, you know, be careful of the IRS and Justice Department coming to get our asses. And then we got to manage Scientology and keep the money going. I mean, I'm not saying poor me, but that shit was stressful for anyone. And I don't care, you know, even if you're the devil, it shit will have you sweating. And it kept us busy all the damn time. And it was the lawyers. It was the lawyers that held the course, that had the legal minds to keep Scientology going. And they did. They helped us set up that IRS association. They helped us set up our offshore accounts. They advised us on all of this shit. And guess what? They kept getting paid and getting paid and getting paid. And you know, Miscavige, L. Ron, blah, blah, blah. No. How about lawyers? People that know what they're doing, because without lawyers, there would be no Scientology today. None at all. It would have just been run out of town in the little carpet bag, get the hell off. But no, these lawyers have learned that, hey, you get this cash cow, you know, maybe you may have to put up with this crappy client you don't like for a while, but you get yourself in a powerful position, maybe you'll attract something else and you don't have to do this. So these lawyers have used this Scientology as a cash cow to get their careers and to launch them into these corporate and great positions. And they're brilliant minds. I mean, you go to school, you learn what you're doing, you do it right. I mean, you know.
Absolutely.
I ain't hating.
No, I get it. I totally get it. And yeah, I mean, you park your moral compass at the door and, you bring your, intellect to bear and you can work for clients like Scientology. And
you get your money, you feed your family, you send your kids to college and you go take your vacation.
Exactly.
But I mean, these lawyers don't get away. I can't tell you how many of them are fucking dead when I was there, Look at Earl Cooley, brilliant lawyer, Boston attorney, legal review. He was on the board of some other things. He was so high regard, dead. John Peterson helped CSC, helped divert all of the funds that the Church of Scientology California had to other corporations, worked years and years to set that place up, dead. And I'm sure there's others, but to me, when you're messing with the devil, you're gonna give up a pound of flesh. I don't give a damn what happens. No one comes through that experience unscathed. I don't care what side of the fence you're on.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. All right, man. Well, this has been very interesting. I really appreciate your time and your answers and your candor on this. This was good stuff.
Well, I appreciate it, Chris. Now, listen, we gotta get some people to read this because
yes, we do.
This is experiences everything that we talked about. Reading this in the sequence that it's presented and in the logic and mindset that it's presented does cover a lot of things about Scientology that people just don't know. And it's not a hack book about Miscavige or a hack book about L. Ron or anything like that. It's just a narrative of what happened. And I think the story is explained honestly enough for people to see the truth in it themselves and take away from it what needs to be taken away from to clear up any confusion about this subject. Right now, it's available on Amazon.com worldwide. That just happened yesterday. At any place where Amazon is, this can be purchased book-wise. And I also have a Kindle version of it. And right now, if you buy a copy of the book, then you can this for only $3. So you'll have the book and you'll basically have the Kindle for one low price. And it's well worth the investment. It's well worth the read. I want people to read it so that we can talk about it. Like you've read it, we can talk about it because so long people have had the wrong idea about what happened, what's going on, why things are the way they are, because they don't have the information. So that metastasizes into a whole crazy monster in and of itself. And I just want to give the correct information so that we don't have to go there with this nuttiness and just proceed from the facts or closer to the truth than we were before. And that's all I'm trying to accomplish with this.
Excellent. Well, the book is actually very good. It's well worth reading. Are you going to be doing an audiobook?
Yes, I will. I have to figure out how to do that.
I will talk to you afterwards about that because I did it myself.
Oh, great. Yeah, well, there you go.
Yeah.
So yes, to answer the question, yes.
Excellent. All right, man. Well, again, thank you very much, folks. Check it out on Amazon.com. Like I said, it is well worth reading. It was a very fast read. It was very, very interesting. And it fills in some really important holes and gaps and clarifies some things along the way. So do check it out. All right, Jesse, we're going to wrap up now. Thanks a lot, man.
Thank you, Chris, and don't be a stranger.
All right, man. All right, folks, leave any questions, comments, or feedback in the comment section below here on YouTube or at my mncriticalthinking.com website. I look forward to your feedback. I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.